didn't give birth to him, but he did give life to me. He does have some emotional challenges. There's no doubt about that. I think that you can't underestimate the importance of the first 3 years of a child's life and their development. It definitely impacted him in terms of his early behavior. It was really tough. And I can't pretend to know. I've not been adopted. I've not been in foster homes. Oftentimes children get mislabeled as being delinquent or quote unquote bad kids, incorrigible, and the like, when really there's some underlying issues there that the earlier you can get the intervention going, the more promising the outcomes can be.
Dear Family is a podcast hosted by Rachel Steinman, a writer, an educator, and a mental health advocate. And Rachel gets us up close and personal, so we feel a strong connection, familiarity, and comfort with her guests. So settle in and join us as we search for true healing and journey with Rachel and her most interesting guests.
Hello, everyone. I hope you are all doing as best as can be expected during this continued pandemic. I cannot believe that it's been a year since I first launched my trailer for Dear Family. I want to thank you so much for tuning in and subscribing and following me on all the social media platforms at Right Now Rachel. That's right with a W. And if you are enjoying this podcast, I have a favor to ask. Please give me a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I can't tell you how much that helps me because it does something with the algorithm that helps put this podcast in front of others so that I can continue to grow and spread my message. And make sure that you subscribe because you're not going to want to miss next week's very special guest, who just happens to be my mom, Lori Callan Schwendt. You're not going to want to miss our banter and her big personality and all of the stories that inspired me to become a mental health advocate and writer. And you guys, this is going to be my 50th episode, and it's publishing a year after my first episode with my awesome brother Adam. So I'm taking a moment to get excited and celebrate, and I hope you'll join me. Today's episode is about what we've been hearing a lot about in the news, and that is how systemic racism is undeniably a public health crisis. Racism, it prevents many people from attaining good health, and that includes mental health with a specific focus on anxiety disorders and stress. So my guest today, her name is Janice Hayes Kaiser, and she's a biracial woman, and she understands this all too well. So I'm so grateful she's here with us today to share her voice. So stay tuned. Janice Hayes Kaiser is a biracial woman who grew up with a front row view of race relations. Born to a Black Alabaman father and to a white British mother, she saw firsthand how her mother's white allyship educated others in the 60s and how her father was not treated as an equal in both the Air Force and in life in general. Janice adopted a Black son from the foster care system when he was just 3 years old. She became a mental health advocate when dealing with her son's post-traumatic stress disorder and his special education needs by using her knowledgeable and compassionate voice to get involved on boards and in establishments that were often white only. Words are Janice's passion and her saving grace. She's an award-winning journalist whose articles have been published in USA Today, the Detroit News, the Seattle Times, and Essence Magazine, among many others. Janice has conducted media relations, speechwriting, and reputation management for several Fortune 100 companies. Currently, Janice is a freelance journalist based in Las Vegas, where she writes about a variety of topics, including social justice, race, health, and adoption. Hi, Janice.
Hi, Rachel. How are you?
I'm great. So we've actually never met in person before, but we have a mutual friend. Her name's Cecily Lerner, and she reached out to me and she said that I had to speak to you. So I immediately reached out to you and we had a great conversation, and I'm so grateful that you are here today. So thank you for being my guest, and a shout out to Cecily.
Yes, she's always connecting people, and that's one of her gifts.
Janice, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your family.
My family is comprised of myself and my son, who his father and I, who is now my ex-husband, we adopted him when he was 3, and he will be turning 20. My father was born in Alabama. He lived there until he was 18, and then he went into the Air Force, enlisted in the Air Force, and part of his tour of duty sent him to Great Britain, where he met my mother, who is a white Brit, and they got married and had 2 children, my sister and I, and we lived all over the country when he was active duty in the Air Force, and primarily grew up in the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle-Tacoma area is where we went to junior high and high school and undergrad, so we consider that home.
Your mom passed away. Your mom was a white Brit. How did her parents take the fact that she was marrying a Black man?
Well, unfortunately, we didn't have that opportunity to know because my mother lost her parents when she was very young. She was a toddler, and she was raised by an aunt in London and went to boarding school. But her sisters and brothers were very open and welcoming, my aunts and uncles, so absolutely no problem there. And no problem on the other side of the pond, so to speak, with my paternal grandparents who were in Los Angeles. They left Alabama and moved to LA when my father, shortly after my father enlisted in the Air Force.
That's really wonderful. And I know that your mom was a kindergarten teacher, which of course is a kindred spirit to me because I was a kindergarten teacher. So I feel like all kindergarten teachers are warm and creative and loving. So that must have been great to grow up having a mom that was a kindergarten teacher. But you also mentioned to me that she was a white ally before that was even a term. Can you explain what that meant back then?
I think for my sister and I, it was an acknowledgement that she would never live our lives, that she would get certain benefits and privileges just as a result of her being a white person, but always having the empathy, always trying to understand, always trying to educate others. I remember her advocating for all of the children who she taught, but especially if she felt that there were children of color, Black children, or other children who were being marginalized or put into a category or somehow not being given the opportunity to be all that they could be. She was always an advocate for them. And I remember many, many years after she retired, we would sometimes be out and around in my hometown of Tacoma, and we would encounter her students who were now adults, and they would come up to her and they would say to me, "Your mother always stood up for me. Your mother was a true advocate for me, and I'll never forget that." And she certainly always was for my sister and I.
What a blessing to grow up with a mom like that. Not just loving and open-minded, but willing to protect others and willing to teach others. You mentioned that you had a front row seat to the bountiful benefits of white privilege. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Well, I certainly could see the advantages that were given to my mother and the way my mother was treated with her colleagues in a professional setting and out and about in the world in terms of the service and the respect that she automatically garnered. The opposite for my father, who, in spite of the fact that he was just as capable and competent and all of those things, that for him, there were oftentimes big slights, small slights, insults, things that continue to demean and chip away at the soul. And I remember thinking about that from a very young age. And it was an advantage to be able to see both of those from a front row seat, to sort of understand the complex relationship that we have in this country with around race, injustice.
Well, and you also had mentioned to me that around your dining room table, you had conversations that were sometimes very simple and sometimes were very complex about the oppressor and the oppressed. Do you remember those conversations? And who was there?
It was usually my sister, my mother, my father, and I. Sometimes it would be a relative or a friend, but I just remember my mother asking a lot of questions, my father speaking really honestly about all of the different encounters he had with people who, whether it was being profiled by the police or being spoken to a certain way by commanding officers in the Air Force, or when he left the Air Force and went into private enterprise. I remember we just talked about those really, just really honestly and openly, and tried to develop an understanding of both perspectives and take that with us everywhere that we went.
So I love that your parents were having very open dialogue with you at a young age at the dinner table. It wasn't like nothing was taboo to discuss.
No, because it really was, so to speak, the elephant in the room. And my sister and I were encountering for the first time, all kinds of situations ourselves where our fellow classmates would say, "Oh my God, that's your dad?" Because it wasn't as common then in the 60s as it is today to have a mixed race family. We would encounter comments and things that would be said, and a lot of times out of curiosity, a lot of times out of ignorance, and sometimes out of sheer hate or mean-spiritedness. But we would always discuss those things openly with both of our parents. I'm really grateful that we did.
Can you tell us about the incident that happened when you were 10 years old and you were at your mother's hair salon?
I took the hair salon with my mother, and it was the first time that I was going with her. I was 10 years old and had very thick, coarse hair, which I still have today. It's wavy, but I'm very fair, and I have greenish hazel colored eyes. And there have been numerous instances in my life where people weren't sure what nationality, as they say, I was. And this woman who was doing my hair turned to my mother and said, "I've never seen a white person with hair this coarse." And there was a long pause, and I could tell my mother was about to say something, but before my mother said anything, I yelled out, "Well, that's because I'm Black, lady." And, it was just this really awkward moment. The woman was she was mortified. My mother was angry. My mother sort of grabbed my hand and we marched out of the hair salon. And my mother handled it really well, because when we got into the car, my mother said, "I'm so proud of you for speaking up for yourself, for claiming your identity, and don't ever let anyone make you feel bad about who you are." And she just had this really unique skill. She had this ability to give you the space you needed to be and acknowledge who you were, but at the same time empathize with that and try to understand what you were feeling, but not trying to own your feelings, like you own them, as a way to grow and mature.
You are a writer, and we'll talk a little bit about that later as well, but you wrote an article called "The Pandemic of Privilege." What did you mean by the title?
In the past few weeks, the good news is we've been hearing a lot of discussion about white privilege, but prior to that, I don't think there's been at least as broad of a discussion with so many people, particularly white people, acknowledging, what that is and how it affects their everyday lives, and therefore how it affects everyone else's. And, I think we're certainly familiar with this invisible enemy that we are contending with in the coronavirus, but I would maintain that the virus of racism and the pandemic of privilege basis to it is another really serious condition that we have to attack in this country.
It's really true. I mean, I think that a lot of white people didn't even understand that term white privilege until now. I think a lot of people are finally opening up their eyes and understanding what that means. And I'm glad it's a dialogue and it's starting to be discussed. We're going to now talk about your son, Levi. So you and your ex-husband, you adopted him when he was 3 years old. He was in the foster system. Is that correct?
Yes, he was.
Yeah. So how did you were you fostering him, and that's how you?
No, there's a process that you go through if you want to do a public adoption, and you go through training in the state of California, which is where we did that. And then once you've passed the training and got the certification and they've done all the background checks, then they start sharing with you children who are in the system. And they do a process called FOST-Adopt, at least at that time they did. You can get to know the child and kind of foster them while the system is going through the process, in this case, terminating the parental rights of the biological parent. We met Levi. He was actually living in a foster home up in Big Bear, and we were living in the LA Basin in LA County. First we saw his picture, then we go and meet him, and we would go visit him. He would come and visit us. And over time, the visits would lengthen until at some point you make a decision. Do you want to proceed with the adoption? That's how the system works.
And you had mentioned that, I want to say when he was 5 years old, his biological parents' rights were terminated. Is that correct?
Well, they were terminated when he was about 3.5, and that's what opened the door for us to adopt him.
I see. Okay. Your ex-husband is a great Black role model for your son. This is what we had discussed, how, he went off to work wearing a suit and he grew up and got an education. He rose out of a hard life in Cincinnati, president of his fraternity. So your son Levi had these great role models, which is really wonderful. He is, and you also mentioned that he's 19, or actually, did you say he's 20?
He's going to be 20 on Friday, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. So by the time this airs, he will be 20. Happy birthday, Levi. Tell us what that meant for you to adopt Levi.
It was a really joyous time in our lives. At that time, I was unable to have children due to a health condition. So it was a wonderful time. I didn't give birth to him, but he did give life to me. It was the opportunity to be a mother and to maybe make a difference in the life of a child who may have, you don't know, but so many children are in the foster system until they age out. Black male children are probably the least adoptable children because of some of the racism that we talked about previously. It was a really joyous time for us, and it happened to coincide with a really sad time as well. My mother-in-law was dying from lung cancer, so it was, he was the rainbow at the other end of the cycle of life.
I know that you said that he had to deal with some emotional challenges, which makes a lot of sense, like post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of those challenges also translated into some of his special education. I know that he is a talented and artistic young man. He makes music, but he's had to deal with a lot of mental health issues. You believe that he is dealing with autism. Is that correct?
I'm convinced that due to the early trauma and all of the foster homes, that he does have some emotional challenges. There's no doubt about that. I think that you can't underestimate the importance of the first 3 years of a child's life and their development. It definitely impacted him in terms of his early behavior. It was really tough. And I can't pretend to know. I've not been adopted. I've not been in foster homes, but I can only imagine the pain that comes along with that. And we tried very hard to try to get him the help that he needed so that he could be the best that he could be, and always wanted him to know it's not how you start, but it's how you finish. I think at this point, his story is still being written. He has reunited with his biological family, and that's a journey of self-discovery that he needs to take as a part of his overall journey. We'll always be there for him and be some of his biggest fans and supporters.
I know that you became this mental health advocate and his advocate when you were dealing with some of the schools, because he couldn't attend a public school or a private school. So you became this advocate for him. Can you tell us how you navigated it and what kind of the journey was for you?
It was a lot of soul searching and reading and talking to people in the mental health community and the adoption community and trying to find the resources. Fortunately, California and Los Angeles does really have a lot of resources. So really trying to get him in front of the right people to make the right diagnosis, to prescribe the right treatments, and, going through learning about therapy and learning about early trauma, trying to create the best, most supportive environment. It's humbling, it's time consuming, it's heartbreaking. But through that, I realized I had no idea, because I had been so fortunate in my own life, at least in my immediate family, we hadn't contended with any mental health issues. So for me, it was a real learning. For us, it was a real learning process. And we were very fortunate to be surrounded by people who had the knowledge and who could help us and try to get us going on the right path.
Did he end up attending the Child and Family Guidance Center? And is that how you got involved?
He did. They have a therapeutic day school that they operate in Northridge, California. And then they offer mental health services for youth and families across the valley. That's how I got involved. My son was a student at the school. Through everything that I had learned, I wanted to see what I could do to help the organization while at the same time helping him and helping others just have a greater impact. So I joined the board of the Child and Family Guidance Center, and it was a real educational experience. It was an honor to serve on the board and try to raise awareness of the extent of children's mental health issues. I think oftentimes children get mislabeled as being delinquent or quote unquote bad kids, incorrigible, and the like, when really there's some underlying issues there that the earlier you can get the intervention going, the more promising the outcomes can be. We just have to take that taboo off of, no matter what the diagnosis is, if it's ADHD, if it's autism, if it's bipolar, whatever the diagnosis is, we have to take the stigma off it and get help for our young people as early as possible and make it accessible.
I know that in the Black community, mental illness is not always discussed. The stigma sometimes is even stronger. And then what even further complicates things is that Black children are often more likely to be perceived as delinquent than dealing with, say, depression or anxiety. I'm curious why you think there are disparities in mental health and in special education for youth that are racial minorities. Why do you think it's so inequitable?
Well, I think it's just one more example of systemic racism. And if people see you automatically by the color of your skin as less than human, as less intelligent, as less law-abiding, as less worthy, you can't blame people for not wanting to put another label on for society to bring them down and to push them aside, hold them back, and figuratively put a knee on their neck. You can't blame people for not wanting to be honest about that and be forthright when there's already so much to overcome just to survive, just to get up in the morning and go through your day. You can't underestimate the burden of racism. One of the reasons why I wanted to get involved, because at the time that I joined the board, there was no diversity on the board. And later there was Latino representation and other Black representation. We have to have those voices around the table. And I'm not saying that there aren't people that won't speak up. And I think as a result of what we're seeing in our world, there's going to be more people who speak up because they realize when you're silent, you're complicit. So everyone has to speak up. For everyone. But I wanted to make sure that voice was at least heard, and that's where it starts.
I completely agree with everything you said. I also think it's inequitable because the funds aren't in those communities. There aren't people of color therapists. I'm so happy that this conversation is happening. And even the defund police conversation about getting social workers or mental health care workers to deal with a situation and de-escalate a situation when likely it could just be all they need to do is truly de-escalate a situation and not throw our young Black males into jail.
Absolutely.
So I think we need more people of color being the voice for our kids.
We really do. And I think, what's clear to me now more than ever is that we don't need a police state. We need a state of caring. We need to bring compassion to education. We need to bring the resources too. But it starts with compassion and empathy and awareness, obviously coupled with the funding that goes along with that. We really need to see people for who they are, appreciate what the perspective that they bring as a result of their backgrounds, and make sure that we have that voice at the table.
Did you need to have that quote unquote talk with Levi about the police?
It's the talk that never stopped having, quite frankly, because every time they leave the house, every parent worries when their children, even their young adult children, are out. I think as the mother of a Black child, and particularly a Black male child, you worry that much more. So you're always reminding them. He grew up in a predominantly white environment, and in the San Fernando Valley, there was diversity, but still in his circle of friends, he was often one of maybe one or two kids of color. Every time you went to the mall, it was like, okay, if they do this, you do that. You're the one that probably, if you've done nothing but you're in the group, you're the one that they may arrest or that the security may target. You comply, you be cooperative, you don't put your hands in your pocket. When you start to drive, keep your license in the dash because we don't want you reaching down. The heartbreaking part is with all of that, that you can't protect them. I mean, when you have the mayor of Atlanta, who the police in the city report to her, and when she so poignantly said, I have a 17-year-old son and I can't protect him, and the force that may use force against him reports to me, your heart just sank because that's, that there's no way you can protect them as long as we have police force that is, riddled with racism, and that it's not just a few bad apples. It's become acceptable. It's become standard operating procedure, even though it's not on the books, so to speak, that thin blue line, they protect themselves and they cover for each other. So it's so wonderful to see that one of the Atlanta officers today is actually cooperating with the DA against his partner. And that's a really courageous move that I hope will start changing the face of policing in this country. It doesn't have to be that way. It really does. And it can't be.
It's a really important conversation. I was on a Zoom call yesterday with one of the heads of police in Los Angeles, who was saying that the officers are actually very diverse. There's a lot of Latino officers, but it's about the culture of the police that needs to change, because that's where the systemic racism gets passed down. So even these Latino officers are protecting their other officers because that's what they've learned and that's what has been handed down to them. So these are really, really important conversations. And that brings me to one of your essays that you wrote called Get In Here and Help Us Clean Up This Mess. And I'm going to quote you, if you don't mind. We hurt for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. We hurt for the elderly white man who was knocked down by the police and left to bleed from the head in the streets of Buffalo. We hurt for the young police officer in Las Vegas who is fighting for his life after being shot in the head while trying to apprehend a thug who was looting under the guise of a peaceful protest. We hurt for the good cops and are outraged by a system that enables the bad ones to flourish. We hurt for the soul of this country. Are you ready to roll up your sleeves and do the hard work with us? I love that because I think we do. We need to roll up our sleeves. Everybody. We're talking everybody. I want to know what you think about the Gen Z and the millennial generation out on the street marching for Black Lives Matter. Do you think they're going to be our generation that's going to roll up their sleeves?
I do. And I think they're showing us that by being out there risking their lives, not just from COVID, but from potential police aggression and violence toward them. They are out there for a cause that is bigger than themselves in some ways and is about their future and their children's future in other ways. So I'm very encouraged by the diversity, the intensity, the sense of purpose, the passion, the commitment. I'm so heartened by that. I worry about them because as proud of them as I am, I'm also worried as hell because what they're doing is really dangerous. And I know that some of them are going to get hurt and some of them have been hurt, but I also really am so lifted by what I see. And I'm so thankful to them, and we all should be. They are teaching us so much. I hope we learn this lesson.
And what's so amazing is that this is spreading all over the world. My husband was telling me that in Israel, the Ethiopian Jews are now marching for Black Lives Matter, which I love. It's like, it didn't even occur to me that would happen. And I love that it's spreading all over the world. And I have to be hopeful that this is a time of awakening. I really, really do. If you could channel your mom, because clearly she was beyond her years and she looked at everyone for who they truly were in their heart, what advice would she say to someone like me who really wants to be a white ally and to help protect all of our children?
I think first and foremost, she would say, lean into love, start with compassion, start with an open heart, and realize that you don't know everything, and take the time to learn about, look back, learn about the history, understand the context, and use that to move forward. Do all things from the vantage point of love and understanding. Never assume that you know another person's story, that you know another person's pain, and that's where the empathy comes in. Ask, listen, probably more than you talk.
And what do you want to say to mothers of Black sons?
I know you're tired. I feel your exhaustion. It's the kind of, exhaustion that you can't catch up on. You can't take a nap. It's just so persistent and deep. I hope that you're encouraged that there's starting to be some chips in the drywall, as I like to say, and that we're starting to see our children and our children's children. We're starting to see young people coming together to create a future that hopefully we'll be able to see, but will certainly benefit our children and our children's children. So I guess in spite of how tired we are, let's stay hopeful. Let's stay involved, keep speaking truth to power, and we stand on the shoulders of so many of our ancestors who were such strong and beautiful people, and just stay strong and stay in the fight.
And would you also tell them that it's okay to take a nap?
Absolutely. Take care of yourselves.
Okay,
take a
good.
nap.
Yeah,
meditate,
I agree.
do whatever you need to do.
Exactly.
We all need to stay healthy. Self-care is really important right now. We're living in very interesting times.
I totally agree with that. What is Levi doing now?
He is thinking about going back to school, to community college. He needed a little time to mature. He's looking at working part-time again. I think post-pandemic, I think he'll go back and work in the grocery industry. He's really getting to sort of know his biological family, which is so important as a part of his own maturation and his own journey. His adoptive father and I are always going to be there for him. We're his biggest fans.
Well, he's very lucky to have such supportive parents. You had told me this when we spoke last, that when he turned 18, his siblings were able to reach out to him, and that's how they were reconnected. Interesting, I'm sure for him to suddenly have siblings when he didn't before. I know that you are a journalist by training, and you've written for USA Today and Detroit News and Essence. What are you writing about these days?
These days, I can't stop writing. It's funny. It's like I wake up every morning and it seems like there's a new issue. So I'm really focusing right now on my own personal writing on social justice and race. I'm also working on some pieces about adoption. That's where I'm focusing my energies right now.
Well, it's so important, not to mention cathartic for you, I'm assuming, but these are topics that are so important and so needed. And I'm so grateful to have your voice, because I think the idea of being biracial and being able to see both sides is very helpful to hear your thoughts. And also adopting a son and understanding that love does not have to be blood related. Love is like the most powerful thing ever. And I think that it's the most healing force. I know that you had mentioned your next foray that you want to get involved in is with homeless youth, also dealing with addiction and mental health. Can you tell us where you're headed?
Well, I'm hoping that I can take my experience with journalism and writing about some of these topics, homelessness, addiction over the years, and turn it into action where I'm not observing and telling other people's stories, but I'm actually hands-on working directly with people. And I'm hoping that storytelling can find its way into it in terms of helping homeless youth tell their stories, write their truth, and use that as a form of empowerment. So I think that's the direction I want to go into. I mean, homelessness is such a pervasive problem, and the homeless youth problem is just heartbreaking. And many of those youth come from the foster system. They were never adopted. They aged out. They had nowhere to go. If I can make an impact in any way, it would truly be an honor to me.
I think you helping them find their voice is probably one of the best gifts you could give them. This is an interesting thing that I just learned yesterday. We know language is so powerful. Rather than saying homeless, I'm going to try to say unhoused. There could be a debate on it. It's an interesting thought. And I also forgot to mention that you are living in Las Vegas. Is there a big unhoused population?
There is. There really is. And I can't speak to it in terms of the volume or the numbers, but I know from what I read and hear on the news that it's a big population and growing. Definitely an opportunity there to help make a difference, I hope.
Janice, I ask all my guests this question. Where were you when you were 20?
I was in Tacoma, Washington in college.
So if you could write your younger 20-year-old self a Dear Janice love letter, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself? What would you say?
Dear Janice, always be comfortable in your difference. Always lead with love, believe in yourself. When things get tough, don't look inward, look outward and see what you can do to help others.
Oh, that's beautiful. Because as we know, giving is the best gift for ourselves. And is there anything that you do that brings you happiness? Do you have any happiness habits?
I do. I try to wake up every day and go through my list, my gratitude list, and focus on all of the things that I have to be thankful for, which are many. I also love to read. I love to travel when we're not in the midst of a pandemic. Right now, I'm trying to focus on physical health and wellness. So I love to swim. It's a great relief to do something physical, go for a walk, go swimming, go for a ride a bike. So that's what I'm trying to focus on and spend more time on.
Janice, where can the listeners find you?
On the medium.com. I publish a lot of pieces there and then use my social media platforms to share them more broadly.
I will have that in the show notes.
Thank you.
So I really, really loved our time together, and I am grateful that you are using your voice to discuss things that need to be said, and that I just want to wish you all the best. And again, my gratitude to you.
Oh, thank you. And my gratitude to you, Rachel. You're doing some really important work and some important writing, your podcast. Thank you so much for making a concerted effort to do the right thing. You're going to get so much, and I'm sure you already are and have been, in return for that. And it's not why you do it, but I'm talking about in terms of personal enrichment. When I'm in LA, I would love to, if it turns out that it's possible, it would be nice if you, Cecily, and I could get together for a cup of coffee or a cocktail or something. So let's stay in touch.
Absolutely. And let's make that a cocktail.
I'm with you.
Perfect. All right,
Janice, take care.
And you too. You take care. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Okay. Bye.
This is Rachel Steinman. For more information or to contact me with any questions, comments, or guest ideas, please check out rightnowrachel.com. That's right with a W. Thank you so much for listening, subscribing, and sharing, dear family. And if you found value in what you've just heard, I would love and so appreciate a great review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time, I wish you love, happiness, and good mental health.